Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the absolute most fascinating paradoxes hidden right in the middle of the ancient Hindu epic, the Mahabharata. When we think of this massive text, our minds usually go straight to divine warriors, righteous kings, and those mind-blowing celestial weapons. But right at the very foundation of this whole grand narrative, there's a totally different kind of story going on. It's the wild story of how an entire royal bloodline, the legendary lunar dynasty, was essentially hijacked by a fisherman's daughter. Seriously, how does a teenage fairy girl hijack the most powerful throne in ancient India? Well, we aren't going to look at her journey as just some standard myth today. Instead, we're going to frame her ascent exactly the way the ancient texts actually portray it, as a gripping, high-stakes political thriller. You are about to see a masterclass in female agency, ruthless calculation, and ultimately, the heavy price of blind ambition. All right, let's start by tracing the mythological origins of our future queen. Now, her birth is exactly as magical as it is unconventional. According to the texts, she's actually born from a cursed celestial nymph who had been turned into a fish named Adrika. Caught by a fisherman chieftain named Dasharaja, she's raised as a commoner right on the banks of the river Yamuna. So during her teenage years, she's working diligently as a fairy girl, but she carries this really heavy burden, a super strong odor that earns her the name Matsyagandha, which literally translates to she who smells like fish. It's a really humble, honestly stigmatized beginning, but it totally sets the stage for an absolutely incredible transformation. Part 1. The Scent of Power. Okay, let's dive into this fateful fairy ride. So, while she's ferrying the wandering sage Parashara across the river, he suddenly becomes completely overwhelmed with lust and propositions her. Now, honestly, a lesser character might have panicked here, right? But Satyavati, she displays staggering presence of mind. She doesn't just give in, she negotiates. Scholars like Pradeep Bhattacharya point out her intense maturity in this moment. She demands that the coitus be mutually pleasurable. She insists on creating a magical mist, keep the whole encounter an absolute secret. And most importantly for her future, she demands her virginity be restored to protect her social standing in society. Oh, and to top it all off, she asks for eternal youth and a captivating musk fragrance to finally replace that fishy odor. I mean, this is a sexually assertive, highly pragmatic negotiation by a young woman who is literally securing her own future. And walking away from this encounter, she is completely transformed. She is no longer Matsyagandha, she becomes Yojanagandha, which means she whose fragrance spreads across the yojana, an ancient measure of distance. So this divine, mesmerizing, musky scent basically completely wipes out the stigma of her past and effectively becomes her primary weapon of attraction. Seriously, it is the exact scent that's going to capture a king. Part 2. A king ruled by lust. Now, to fully understand how Satyavati executes her ultimate master plan, we really have to look at the man she's dealing with here, King Shantanu of Hastinapura. The ancient texts paint him as a guy historically driven by sensual pleasures. I mean, earlier in his life, he married the goddess Ganga purely out of lust, blindly agreeing to a vow where he'd never question her actions. And that terrible decision resulted in him watching completely helplessly as she drowned 7 of their newborn sons, before he finally snapped and spoke up to save the 8th. So the texts show him as selfish, reactive, and severely lacking in self-control. Now contrast that with Satyavati. She is far-sighted, fiercely calculating, proactive, and deeply mature. When Shantanu literally follows her intoxicating scent through the woods and begs to marry her, she doesn't just swoon like a typical maiden. No way. She sees a golden opportunity. Part 3. The Ultimate Royal Ultimatum. So here is her masterstroke. The ultimate demand is laid out super simply. Satyavati will only marry the king if her future sons exclusively inherit the Hastinapura throne. And wow, this is a massive problem. Shantanu already has a rightful heir, Crown Prince Devavrata, who is highly accomplished and totally beloved by the kingdom. Predictably, Shantanu is dejected. He falls into this deep, deep depression, completely torn between his duty to his incredible son and his desperate lust for Satyavati. But Satyavati and her father, they completely hold their ground. They are utilizing realpolitik in its absolute purest form, taking total advantage of a king's weakness to secure an entire dynasty for themselves. Part 4. The Vow That Changed History. And this brilliantly illustrates the domino effect of that ultimatum. Seeing his father moping around in utter despair, Crown Prince Devavrata actually goes and visits the fisherman himself. Step 1. Devavrata voluntarily gives up his right to the throne, just like that. But the fisherman, being just as calculating as his daughter, argues that Devavrata's future children might still contest the claim one day. So step 2, Devavrata takes the Bhishma Pratya. This is a terrible, unbreakable vow of lifelong celibacy, ensuring he will never, ever have heirs. And because of this terrifying vow, the heavens actually rename him Bhishma. Step 3 is now complete. Literally, without lifting a single weapon, Satyavati's lineage secures absolute, uncontested power over Hastinapura.
But history, as we all know, loves a bit of irony. After King Shantanu passes away, Satyavati rules the kingdom with Bhishma's help. She has 2 legitimate sons with the king, but tragically, both of them die young and entirely childless. Her grand, carefully calculated plan is suddenly on the verge of total collapse. So what does this master strategist do? Well, she calls upon the secret she secured years and years ago. She forces her premarital, illegitimate son from that river encounter with sage Parshara, the famous sage Vyasa, to father heirs with her dead son's widows through an ancient practice called niyoga. And because of this wild workaround, the legendary divine lunar dynasty technically ends right then and there. It basically becomes the biological lineage of a former slave maiden and a wandering sage.
Part 5. The Price of Blind Ambition.
So what does this all mean? The crucial point is captured beautifully in this quote by author Dhanalakshmi Iyer. She writes, Satyavati's story teaches that determination and commitment are different from avarice and calculation. One should know where greed takes over from ambition, and it's so true. Satyavati is a truly remarkable example of female agency in the ancient world. She manipulated powerful men, she secured her own future, and she made absolutely sure her bloodline sat on that throne. But her unscrupulous means and that cold, calculating rootlessness, they came with a very heavy cost. The heirs produced by her desperate final gamble, the blind Dhritarashtra and the pale Pandu, would go on to father the Kauravas and the Pandavas. Which leaves us with this final, truly provocative question to ponder. Did Satyavati actually secure her dynasty's future, or did her greed just guarantee its total destruction? Because, as you probably know, the very children born from her relentless ambition are the exact ones who will eventually tear the kingdom apart in the devastating apocalyptic Kurukshita war of the Mahabharata. She hijacked a throne brilliantly, no doubt about it, but the seeds she sowed in doing so ultimately burned the whole kingdom to the ground. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this has given you a totally fresh perspective on the true origins of this epic tale.